First of all, it was not easy. Not one day was easy on Everest. And the idea that all the way up, you're stepping over bodies, people that didn't make it as far as you were.
Welcome back to Everyone Has a Story, True Tales from Everyday Life. Today's story is about an extraordinary woman, Dianne Erskine-Hellrigel, an environmental activist who is today a driving force behind the St. Francis Dam National Memorial and Monument, California Condor preservation, and the restoration of wilderness hiking trails and Native American traces. A world traveler, Dianne has visited 75 countries, including 26 trips to Africa. She speaks 5 languages and has climbed many of the premier peaks, including Mt Everest twice, Mount Fuji, and Kilimanjaro. Introduced to classical music at a young age, she fell in love with the works of Beethoven, Mozart, and her great-great-grandfather, Antonin Dvorak. Dianne has a long resume as an entertainer, with credits in film and television, as well as commercials. She's a member of SAG, AFTRA, and Equity. She's married to a Navy vet, and her one daughter, Christina, is the love of her life. This is the true tale of a most inspirational woman. Here is Dianne's story.
My mother had had 12 pregnancies that she lost. I was pregnancy number 13. I was born at 6 months or nearly 6 months gestation. I weighed 2 pounds and 9 ounces. And I was so lucky that my mother's gynecologist had just come from Germany. She was a doctor, she was Jewish, and she had the tattoos on her arm with her number. The only reason that she made it through the Second World War was because she was a doctor, and they needed a doctor in the camp. This woman smuggled out children and saved countless lives. And after the war, she moved to America. And when I was born, so tiny and unable to really survive, this woman told my mother, "I've seen so much death that I promise you I will do everything I can to keep this baby alive." I started drinking goat milk and it worked. And ounce by ounce, I started gaining weight and strength. And this woman was so fantastic. She even stayed awake with me for 5 days to keep me breathing. Every time I would stop breathing, she'd flick me with her index finger, and I'd go, okay, and I'd start breathing again. And so I owe this woman, the doctor, my dearest mother, and goats for me being here. And as I was growing up, my mother said, no matter what you decide you want to do, don't hold back. Don't not do it because it's dangerous or it's difficult. She said, you can do it. Whatever you want to do, go for it. And that's how I've lived my life. When I was 4 years old, my mom had a friend in the film industry. And this woman kept asking my mother, please, please take Dianne out on all these auditions. Well, my mother wasn't too keen on this. So she kept putting it off and putting it off. And finally she said, okay, Elise, look, I will take her to this audition, but if she doesn't get it, leave me alone, okay? And Elise said, okay. Well, I got it. That started me in the film industry. So I did all kinds of wonderful things. I modeled, I did a lot of commercials. I was in some films and some TV, and it was fantastic. I loved it. The only problem was every time we drove to Hollywood, I would get car sick. So that kind of put me off for a while. But as I got older, you know, that became less and less, and I enjoyed it more and more. And the best thing I ever did was a Buick commercial. And I say the best thing because I worked one day, and unfortunately, the producer on this particular thing. It was his very first thing that he ever did. And he had no clue that SAG rules said, you work on a Sunday, it's triple golden time. I'm sure this man never worked again. But on that one day of work, I made $75,000 through the year. It was fantastic. I wish I could have done that every day, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But I did a lot of commercials, and I did some great films. And then I got too old, and so I stopped doing things like that. But I had a huge modeling career as well. I did a lot of catalogs. I did the Pennies catalog, and I did a lot of photography. And I worked with a designer in Hollywood, and I got to wear her best clothes, did a lot of work, modeling clothes for people, for audiences, which was really fun. And I loved every minute that I had in the spotlight. And as soon as, I got too old, I hit like 35, and I was no longer, the valuable commodity that I was before. And so then I went back to one of my childhood passions, which was nature. When I was a kid, I lived on 90 acres, and I was fascinated up above where our house was. We had a beautiful house and a pool and a fence that blocked nature out. But I went beyond the fence. And one of the things that really got me into nature was the meadowlarks. The beautiful songs, and they nested on the ground, which I found was amazing. And so one day I was up there, and I scared the parents away, and I looked at the nest, and I saw a baby meadowlark opening up the egg. And that sold me on nature right there. And so ever since then, I have been a protector of nature. I've worked with the condors to keep them safe. I've seen the condor school. When they were first released, they were getting killed because they were so huge, 10 feet across, that when they hit or landed on an electrical line, they would be electrocuted. And so they were pulled back in, and they were put into a cage that had a mock-up electrical line and another one that was a tree. If they landed in the tree, everything was great. If they landed on that mock electrical line, a technician would give them a terrible shock, and they would zip over to the tree. After they put all of the condors through this, they were able to release them, and nobody died again from, the electrical power lines. So that was great. Loving the condors so much and seeing them so high in the air, these huge, monstrous birds that when they flew towards you looked like pterodactyls, it got me thinking I would love to fly like a condor. But being a human, I don't have wings, so I thought, well, that's impossible. What else could I do? So I decided to climb some mountains. My first mountain was Everest. So I worked and worked and worked. I flew to Japan, and I did Fuji, and I did Yufuin there as practice. Did all the mountains that I could in California, and then I went for it. I flew to Tibet, which that was an experience all in itself. I had a driver that took me through the park to basically within 3 miles of base camp. And which is amazing to be able to get that close to base camp, because on the other side it's 11 days to get there. But here I was in Tibet with food that was just horrendous, to say the least. And I started climbing, and I climbed, and I climbed. For 2.5 months I was on that mountain. I was 125 pounds when I left, and when I came home I was 84 pounds. The last day going up on Everest, first of all, it was not easy. Not one day was easy on Everest. And the idea that all the way up you're stepping over bodies, people that didn't make it as far as you were, they can't bring the bodies down. It's you have all these 90-degree, ice shelves that you have to get over. And you do that with an ice axe, and it's horrendous. But on the last day, I saw a girl who I think was probably from Germany, probably somewhere between 18 and 22, sitting on a rock. Her arms were crossed, her head was down. Her blonde braids came down to her waist, wearing a hat, a woolen hat. She reminded me of my daughter, beautiful young thing. And she was frozen, she was dead. And I sat with her for a while and I listened to the wind. And I felt so bad for this girl, knowing that she would be the next body that would be wrapped in a blue tarp and no one would see her again. And it brought me down to earth, and I still feel bad for this girl and everyone else that's up there. Everest is not something that I would recommend anyone do. You have to be so tough. But I did it for my mom. And when I got to the top, I was so miserable, I can't even tell you. But I smiled and I said, Mom, this is for you. So that was in 2003. 2013, I decided I wanted to go back to Everest. So I went to Nepal, and we had a guide. Every one of us had porters to carry our stuff. Whereas when I did it the first time, I had 65 pounds on my back. So if you can imagine me at 84 pounds, it was pretty tough. It was so cool in Nepal. The first day, we flew into Lukla, which is the absolute worst airport in the entire world. It is so short, and you're in high altitude. So you land, and you go flying up the runway, and there's a block wall in front of you, and you just know you're going to hit it. We stopped about 3 inches before the wall. And we were all scared to death. And then when you take off to leave, you fly off the runway and you feel the airplane falling. And you look down and you see airplanes below you that didn't make it. And you feel the pilot giving gas to the plane, and you go, and eventually you gain altitude and you can wipe the sweat off of your forehead. It's really tough. But it was an amazing trip. The first day, you have to climb 10,000 steps. And my guide said, oh, you'll love it, because when you get to the top, there's a Hilton up there. And I said, there's a Hilton up there? He said, yes. And I was so excited to be able to finish my first climbing day and stay in a wonderful bed in a Hilton hotel. I was just delighted. And so that kept me moving, even though my knees were swelling and in such pain from going up all these steps. So we finally get to the top, and I said to him, where's the Hilton? He said, oh, well, it's just around the corner. You have to keep going a little bit. So we kept trudging along. We get up there, and here's this Mickey Mouse little tiny hotel that's called the Hill, Hill, Tun, Tun. We were so disappointed. So one of the things with this that made it easier was that every tea house or little motel, hotel thing, they fed you. So you didn't have to bring anything but snacks, which was great, because last time I had to take all of my food. So we found out that you got your choice. They had a menu, and they would give you like a little tiny rice bowl for your dinner or your lunch or your dinner. And that's all the food that you got. So in 11 days, I lost close to 20 pounds, but I didn't go down to 84 like I was on the last one. So at least we had sustenance along the way. But it was tough. Most of it was steps. Some of it was was trail. Every time we did steps, our knees were killing us. They were quite swollen. It was fun. One point, all of the hikers stopped, and I couldn't figure out what their problem was. They were all stopped. So I went up towards the front of the line. I was asking people, what's the problem? They said, there's a yak up there, and he's not moving off the trail, and we're all scared. So I went up to the yak, and I started petting him and talking to him, and slowly I got him to move off the trail. So I got the name, the Yak Whisperer. So climbing became one of the most wonderful things in my life. I continue to climb smaller mountains, large mountains, it doesn't matter. I go after every one that I can. And I'm back to my mom telling me, whatever you want to do, go for it, because you can do it. And so every climb I do, I think of my mom. On my 25th trip to East Africa, I decided to climb Kilimanjaro. And so I did that mountain. It was, to me, it was a piece of cake after doing Everest. It was just fantastic. There were 15 climbers with me, and only 7 of us made it. But compared to Everest, it was so easy. I absolutely loved it. It was gorgeous. I got to put my hands on the glaciers, and those glaciers are more or less gone now. So the glaciers are gone. The people down below are not getting any water, so they're going to have to move, which eventually might be a good thing, because maybe those trees that were cut down by the people down below that used to direct the water up, maybe those trees will come back, and maybe those glaciers will reappear one of these days. But I got to see the crater. One really interesting thing is that I put my hand on the glacier near the crater, and it was hot, which meant the magma was coming up. It was close. So we'll see what happens with that mountain. It may explode someday soon. I continue to climb, continue to love nature. I work in nature now. I'm building a trail. I've protected a lot of, I've done legislation for wilderness, for national monuments, for a national memorial, the worst in California as far as loss of life. I love it. I've got one more national monument to do and one more legislation for wilderness, and I'll be done.